What is up, y'all? Kevin Kuhn here from Athlete Factors. This is the Athlete Factors podcast. My guest today is Dr. Ashley Shrum from Calibrated Physical Therapy. How are you doing this evening?
I'm doing good, Kevin. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I'm super pumped to talk to you today.
Awesome. Well, thank you for taking the time to do this. This is great. So tell us a little bit about your background as far as athletics go, academics, professionally. Take it away.
Yeah, I'll give you kind of the quick and dirty of it, right? So we won't go into all the in-depth everything, but I have been an athlete pretty much most of my life. I have an autoimmune condition called rheumatoid arthritis. And that really limited me. I was diagnosed at 14 months old. So I have a real long history of autoimmune disorder. And so it's been kind of one of these barriers that I have to keep overcoming at different times, starting from just a baby. But yeah, so I couldn't walk till I was like 5 or 6. And so this is kind of why I got into physical therapy and kind of how I am as a person. But I couldn't walk till I was like 5 or 6 really, and like really well. And I was in physical therapy like pretty much my whole life. And everyone told me like, you can never do this or you can never do that, right? So I had a lot of medical staff telling me like, no, you'll never do this, or you're going to be in a wheelchair. Or I even had one doctor go as far to tell me that I'm going to probably die by the time I'm 30. And I'll be honest, I'm
Wow.
32 and I'm living a good life. Like I can't. So I had a really good physical therapist when I was a kid. And it really empowered me, right? It gave me hope. And that's a big part of why I became a physical therapist in the first place and why I continue to push through some of these barriers as a kid, right? And continue to be an athlete as best I could. Like when I was younger, I played pretty much any sport that you can think of. I love sports. Like I can just jump in and play. I'm just capable of doing that. I think likely because I had all that physical therapy as a young kid, like I'm very able to just pick up the game and go and excel at it pretty well, which is not easily said for a lot of people, but I had a lot of therapy for that. And so that's kind of my why I became a physical therapist in the first place is my background and all the education I got and all the hope that I had and guidance I had from really good physical therapists. So I played volleyball mostly, and that's kind of the sport I still play to this day. I work out and lift weights and do things like that and cycle, but I play volleyball, and that's kind of like where my passion lies, and that's what my business is after. But I went to St. Louis University in St. Louis, Missouri. That's where I'm from, where I grew up, and I did my undergraduate degree there, as well as my doctorate degree in physical therapy from the St. Louis University. And then from there, and I graduated that in 2012. So I've been going since 2012 with my license as a physical therapist. I played a little bit of college club volleyball. I lost a scholarship in recruitment from an injury to go into play college sports. So that was kind of like didn't happen. I just played for a fun club league and then sand league at bar leagues and stuff like that for an adult, which is really fun. And that's what I still do now. I kind of just play adult for fun leagues. But that's kind of my sports background currently. And then my practice, I've been practicing as a physical therapist since 2012. I worked with a chiropractor my first year out of college, which is really fun. So like chiropractic and PT together. I also worked in a hospital and a skilled nursing facility. I just saw every patient population that you can think of. Like anybody that I could see, I saw because I really just wanted to see kind of where my niche was and where I thrived. From there, I moved to Houston and I worked with occupational athletes, AKA the workforce, right? So people over the age of 18, somewhere between 18 and usually 70s, 60s usually is like the highest. And I did that for about 4 years. Then I moved to Denver, where I'm at now, and I started working with a group that does outpatient physical therapy of all age ranges, but mostly I was treating children or people in their 50s. Like it was kind of dependent on the time of day. But I really fell in love with treating kids again. And that's kind of where I was like, okay, cool, that's what I want to do. And so while I was working for someone else, I started developing my own business. And I wanted to work at mostly in telehealth, so telerehabilitation, just visual. And that's kind of what I do now. I started my company, Calibrated Physical Therapy. And so we have a big mission to help children and youth athletes specifically. So I really niched down in my own business because it's what I'm passionate about.
Mm-hmm.
And I started treating nothing but volleyball players of all age ranges. And then yeah, so while I was working with kiddos again, I really got tired of seeing all of these kids with injuries, like really stupid injuries from poor decisions. And I'm gonna call them stupid injuries because they're overuse injuries. There's someone in a power position to program them just made a bad decision. And be it that's how they train or just lack of knowledge is what I heard most of the time. Like when I actually reached out to talk to these coaches who were trying to help these kids, it's just lack of knowledge. What I came across actually, it's a lot of parents who are volunteering. They really don't have any background. They just want to have the kids to be able to have a team, so they volunteer to coach, and then they're just kind of in and they look at all this crap on YouTube and Google, and they just kind of piecemeal things together to make it happen. And then I see all these kids that have injuries. And I got really tired of seeing kids, they're having big surgeries like ACL repairs. And I had one kid had their ankles were pinned at 14. Like, you're 14 and they're pinning your ankle. Like, that's not right. Like, that's going to affect big in your whole life. And I want these kids to continue on with sports because I think there's so much good that can come from playing sports, and using it as a vehicle to becoming a better person as you grow in age. Like, you can learn a lot in a sport. You can learn good and bad, but you can learn a lot. So my why I started my own business and why I focus on the goal that I have with my business is I really got tired of seeing kids just having silly injuries. Like, I figure if I can do anything, I can help these people understand the whole training process and why injuries occur in youth athletes, as well as what the injuries actually are. So my business has a goal and a mission. I'm on a mission. I want to help prevent 100,000 unnecessary youth overuse injuries by the year 2030. So I gave myself 10 years to impact 100,000 lives. And that's crazy, right? That's a big goal, right? Like, that's
It's a very
huge.
big goal.
It's a huge goal. And
Yeah.
the only way I'm going to get to do my goal is I'm kind of thinking of it like this. I focus all of my energy for this on the coaches. So I specifically talked to youth volleyball coaches because I'm treating athletes one-on-one. And if I'm seeing them one at a time, it would take me forever to get to 100,000 people, right? But a coach every season, they're seeing 15 to 30 to 45 children. They're impacting 45 people. And then every person they tell impacts some more people. And every person they tell impacts some more people. So I have this kind of trickle down effect. So I'm going after youth coaches for my education, and that's who all of my free materials and all the materials I put out, who my podcast, everything is geared towards volleyball coaches, youth volleyball coaches. And so that's how I think, I'm hoping that I can get, and stuff like this, right? Like talking with you, I can get into 100,000 effects like in 10 years, right? That'd be pretty cool.
Yeah. So how are you going to measure that?
You know what? I don't really have an objective measure. I really don't. I just think it's like, it's so lofty that it's just saying I want to make a really big impact. So my thing is, if I can talk to 100 coaches this in between now and 2021, right? So in a year, if I can talk to 100 coaches and they talk to 100 people, then I know I'm heading in the right direction, right? So my goal is to talk to literally 100 people this year. Like, that's how I'm measuring my own self goal. And in 10 years, that's what 100 times 10, I don't even know, that's 1,000. Yeah. So if they tell 1,000, and if they tell that many people, I think we can get there pretty close. So I'm hoping that if I get to talk, that's how I'm measuring it, is 100 people this year, and hoping that they tell more people. And so that's hopefully it. But I don't know how I'd objectively really measure that goal. I'm just hoping that I can make a really big impact.
No, I like that. I think that's one of those things. My mentor Ambrose, he and I have talked about kind of his what he considers his calling or his goal, and it's extremely similar. His goal is to prevent 1 million overuse injuries, and like, but that's one of the questions I've asked him. Like, how do you measure that? Like, you can't really measure it, and it's a similar situation where it's like, okay, well, I'm going to impart as much knowledge as I can on the athletes that I work with and their parents, and then the coaches that he interacts with, and then the other strength coaches, kinesiologists, athletic trainers, physical therapists, orthopedic surgeons, everyone else that he is able to interact with. And by sharing kind of his his system and his understanding of how all of these injuries, these are non-contact injuries for the most part. We're not talking about concussions in football. We're talking about ACL tears. We're talking about stress fractures. We're talking about sprained ankles. We're talking about things that should be preventable. And then, so I guess let's go into a little bit about, I guess, what makes these preventable, and what's your general system of preventing these injuries?
I think that is a great question. I do not think that all injuries are preventable, right? So things, I can't guarantee prevention because accidents happen, and there's just ways I can help ease the potential for an injury, right? So there's known things that are out there that say, okay, you really have to look at workload volume, right? And in volleyball, we're looking at jumps and lands and swings. That's the main thing, right? Like those are the two big things that happen in the sport. So I'm really trying to educate people about their preseason training, right? Their workload volume preseason, and then in-season activities to be doing, right? Like what type of strength are you doing in season? How are you scheduling practices? Things of that nature to try to prevent overuse. What I have found talking with coaches so far is that not a lot of them measure that. A lot of these youth coaches really don't even understand what I'm saying when I say, well, what's your workload volume? Like, they don't really understand, okay, they don't understand the mechanics of the movement as much as how to coach the movement, right? Or say, okay, this is what we need to do to get in this position, or this drill is supposed to help with that. But they don't understand that not everyone is prepared for that drill and what that even looks like. And another thing that I teach is a lot of people get hurt and injured when they return to sport from rehabilitation. And that's a big component too, that a lot of people aren't understanding kind of how to reintegrate the athlete once they've been released by their doctor, right? So if they've had a surgery, they've gone to physical therapy. If they went the insurance model, they're going to be discharged well before they're ready to perform. They may be stable, right? And in surgeon terms, stable. The surgeon washes their hands of you because you're good. The physical therapist is seeing you. The insurance says, you only get 20 visits for this, or you only get 15 visits for this diagnosis. Even though we know, like ACL, it can take upwards of a year before you're really ready to return to sport. And that's a lot of mental stuff going on there too. So how do these coaches safely take these people, these young athletes, and integrate them back into the sport? There's no education for them for that. The physical therapist is done because you're not going to their office anymore. Because of HIPAA, because of liability laws, we're not allowed to reach out to the coaches and speak about the patient. So where's that? There's a gap now, right? Where coaches just come in and think, oh, this athlete's been sitting there for a year in therapy. They've been training. Well, no, a lot of physical therapy is not sport related. Like a lot of physical therapists may not understand the demands of volleyball. They're loaded up. They know how they get you back. They know they got to get you running, but they might not understand, how long does each play last? How long are you actually in motion for? They may understand you need to jump, land, pivot, cut, dive. Great. But they don't really understand swing. They really don't understand like how long do you need to do those things to appropriately set the workload. And I don't know, when I was a physical therapist, I didn't have time to look up every sport if I didn't understand it. Like I'd never treated a lacrosse player before. I've never played lacrosse. I had to look up what lacrosse is. I have 25 minutes on my lunch break to look up what lacrosse, like the demands of lacrosse, and try to do a quick Google search, right? Like I'm just being honest here. Like that's not my sport, but I'll treat you as best I can when you're coming in. And then your insurance gave me 6 visits and only allows me to bill certain codes, which really either I'm working for free or I bill those codes and have to kind of be dictated, right? So that kind of sucks for the rehab world. And that's where I'm hoping to bridge my gap with education, is how to reintegrate to sport and reintegrate to performance, which are different, right? So just getting into sport is way different than getting up into high performance and being able to be more athletic and demanding. So I think the biggest thing is just trying to give education as best I can about how to prevent injuries, meaning how to schedule your workload, how to warm up appropriately, how to get the body prepared for the demands you're placing upon it, and how to recognize when there's too much demand, how to talk to your athletes and recognize and get them to tell you that, hey, that's too much. So that's kind of where I've been focusing a lot of my effort for the prevention side of things is on educating what I can to coaches and hopefully parents in the meantime too. They'll get a chance to listen to some of my podcasts or see some of the content I'm putting out from the coaches, right? That's the first person. And then they can hopefully have their athletes watch some of these videos if they're not quite sure how to explain it. But that's a big thing, is just finding what are the common injuries that happen in volleyball. And lateral ankle sprain is the number one injury in volleyball, right? Number one by far. So how do I help people understand what it means to have an ankle sprain, how to recover, and when to brace, how to brace, when to push, when not to push, how to structure landing, how to do strengthening, what you should be preparing, when you should be doing certain strengthenings, and when you should pull back because it's going to be too much on your tendons. Stuff like that. Does that kind of answer your question, Kevin?
For sure. No, I think that's it sounds very similar to so I came out of grad school. I was working with a professional running club in Indianapolis. My background is in cross country and track and field, so I wanted to work with those type of athletes at a high level. And after doing that in Indianapolis, I was like, this weather sucks. The Midwest is awful. I wanted to come back to Texas, and I wanted to work with youth athletes. I've always enjoyed that, and so I was able to connect with this guy Ambrose Coleman, and what he was able to teach me that really blew my mind was that strength coaches and sport performance coaches are really good at teaching athletes how to lift, but they're not good at all at teaching them how to decelerate outside of the sagittal plane, change direction, reaccelerate, cut, pivot, some of those other things that you said. And so before our main focus was touching a barbell, before we did that, it was first and foremost to teach not only proper sprint mechanics forward, but then also deceleration. Like, the faster you go, the better your brakes have to be, right? So if you are a race car and you don't have legit brakes, you don't have solid brakes, like, sorry, you're not going to win the race. You're probably going to crash, right? So from an athletic standpoint, our goal was always, whether we had a 5 or a 6-year-old or whether we had a high school or a college athlete, like, the fundamentals of movement don't change. And so we could see in a class a volleyball player, a softball player, a football player, and a cross-country runner, and there wasn't a whole lot of variation when it came to training what we call athletic skills or athletic movements. And then when it came to the strength and conditioning, that's where things were, a little different. So it sounds to me like there's quite a bit of overlap. And what I really appreciate is I'm coming at this from a strength coach or the kinesiology perspective, and you're coming at it from more of the clinical physical therapy side. And the thing that I love about all of the professions within the, let's say, health, wellness, exercise physiology, rehab sort of thing is we all have access to the same science. We all have access to the same textbooks. We all have access to the same bodies. Like, that's what we're working on. The specific lane that we're in has a little bit of overlap. I'm not driving in your lane. You're not driving in my lane, but we're on the same road, right? So that's what I really appreciate. I think that it's really, really good for people to hear that it's not enough to get cleared by your PT or cleared by your ortho and assume you're ready for competitive play. Like, you're physically not ready. There's, like you said, a huge gap in there that you've got to you've got to not only recondition the body from a metabolic standpoint, but there's also a lot of nuanced movements that you've got to retrain. You've got new software to upload to your neurological system. So I think that's really cool that,
Oh,
that you
I
brought
love
that up.
that. I love that. You have new software to upload. I love that so much. You definitely do. You have to update because your
Yes.
brain has to reconnect to your body, right? So anytime we have pain in the body, we kind of get this smudging effect in the brain. So if you have pain in a region, you used to be like, it's like I always tell people, it's like you have a map. You have or a blueprint to a house, right? It's all the schematics. It's laid out perfectly. You know exactly where every little outlet's going to go. And then pain is like someone comes around and spills coffee on your blueprint, and now everything's kind of there, but you can't quite tell exactly where that outlet's supposed to go.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we do in rehab a lot of the time is we really try to sharpen and redraw those lines on the blueprint so that way you can read the schematic again. And usually that's where physical therapy tends to end, because we've got pain under control, and then our lane is like get your neuromuscular system back on. But typically physical therapy just kind of ends right there. Like there's a gap that happens because I don't think that we're allowed a lot of the time or understand a lot of the time that we have more due diligence to provide for these athletes. And usually around that time is when I start having athletes work with folks who are in the strength conditioning world. Like we're working together now.
Mm-hmm.
They're out of pain. We're still working on cleaning up some of these movements, but they still need to start loading a lot more than what I usually have the capability with in a physical therapy gym, unless it's a performance gym, right? That already has some of this other stuff in there as well. But your typical outpatient physical therapy doesn't have that. So that's when I usually have my athletes begin to work with a performance coach in that way too. And they've been reintegrated, but we're still cleaning up some of those neuromuscular patterns or those blueprints. And I think that's such a great way to say it, the upload software. I'm going to use that a little bit too now. It's just another way to connect people's thoughts, right? Like,
Oh yeah.
it's really cool that you and your mentor are working towards that. I think that what we do is very underserved in youth athletics. Very much so. They do. Most youth athletics do not have access to any kind of strength and conditioning coach, any kind of athletic trainer, any kind of physical therapy, any kind of rehab, nothing like that for recovery, for anything. They just don't have access to it unless they pay privately. Their
Mm-hmm.
parents take them to do private stuff. But your general clubs and high schools, they just don't have access to that. And I mean, I don't know, my high school sports, like, and what I understand from high school sports, like the athletic trainer really did not pay attention to many sports outside of football because there was one of them, and there's, three football teams. There was a varsity, a JV, and a freshman team. And football
Mm-hmm.
teams are huge. Like
Yep.
there's hundreds of kids for one athletic trainer, and then you spread that across country too. Like, come on, that's just too much demand for one person to truly be able to do much. Like
Mm-hmm.
there's just not much that person can do for all those kiddos, and that's kind of sad. And really it makes me mad more than anything. Like I don't want to say curse words on here, but it pees me
You're
off.
allowed. You're
It
allowed.
pisses me off. I mean, like, that we treat our kids this way and we put such a demand on them and then don't give them the resources that they need. Like we expect them to play like a professional athlete, but do not give them any of the resources of a professional athlete. Like, come on, that's stupid.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's set them up for failure in other ways too, right? Like this is, yeah, that's so tough. And even when a high school team does have a strength coach, so often, you know, the strength coach has, 1 hour, maybe 2 to 3 times a week, and in that hour they're expected to deliver results that the head coach wants. And often the head coach is like, okay, just make them stronger. That's your job. You're a strength coach. Make them stronger. Get them a stronger squat. Get them a stronger bench, and maybe deadlift. Definitely clean if it's the football team. And it's things like that are nice, right? They're nice. They're when you see that on paper, like, oh, on average, our team went from, they averaged 350 in the squat at the beginning of the season. At the end of the season, they were up at 405 or something like that. Like, oh, that's really cool. However, it kind of, I take it back to that whole idea of you're teaching a vertical deceleration pattern in the weight room, and on the football field, vertical deceleration, yeah, that's important if you are jumping to block a field goal, or if you're jumping in the air to catch a ball, or jumping in the air to defend against them. But you're also sprinting forward, you're also cutting. Like these deceleration patterns exist in 3 dimensions, not just in the sagittal plane. So even when there are strength coaches, oftentimes they don't have the time to do as much as we would like. And so unfortunately, like you said, the kids who can afford to get private help tend to be able to do better and last longer, in their sporting career, just because, the chances of them getting a little bit more help or better help are a little bit higher. So yeah, that does kind of suck. That's the world we live in, unfortunately.
Yeah, I like that you keep mentioning deceleration and how important it is for deceleration. I think I'm gonna take a step back for a second and say that deceleration is where people get injured. Controlling their movement to slow down is where people get injured, and for non-contact, right? If you're not having a contact injury, it's just you and you just come down or you try to slow down. That deceleration is big. That's where injuries happen. And so getting people to really understand how to appropriately slow their body down from all the force that they just exerted is huge. That's a big point of what I'm focused on to prevent injuries, as well as teaching that to these coaches, is how do you really set up on the court to allow them to slow down and give these kids space, or even teach them how to slow down, or how to teach them to control their muscles when they're in a stretched out position. Like that's when injuries occur most of the time.
Yeah, how much of the weight room is spent on eccentric loading versus concentric loading? Like that's one aspect of deceleration, but yeah, like so much of the weight room is concentric focused, and you train these muscles to generate force but not to absorb force. And yeah, you blow out the brakes, and then the knees are the first to go, or the ankles, or whatever the case may be. So yeah,
That's
so true.
That's true. In volleyball, it's the shoulder a lot because of the acceleration of the rotator cuff, right, as you're coming through the swing, and then landing, right? So knees and ankles, but those are the big ones: ankles, knees, and shoulders.
Heads, shoulders, knees, and toes. I think you're muted right now, so no one can even hear you laugh.
Yeah, sorry, I'm muted because I can't find my headphones, so I didn't want everyone to have a bunch of feedback whenever you're talking, so I just have muted. So my husband and I are sharing this office during COVID times, right? So he's home a lot more now, and I'm home a lot more now. So we've been sharing his office. He gets it during the day, and I take it over at night. And then during the day, I'm in all over. I'm just wherever. I can't stay in one spot like he can all day long. So, but yeah, it's a mess. He's got stuff everywhere for me, so I don't know where he put them. So I'm muting myself when you talk, so that way I'm being respectful to all the audience. They don't hear a bunch of like reverb and feedback,
Nice. Well, that's very thoughtful of you. So I will. I was going to ask this question later, but I think this is a really good spot to throw it in. So, one of your recent Instagram posts, you talked about landing mechanics, and you showed a picture of, legs landing with the knees coming in, and they're basically touching, or the thighs are touching. And so, talk a little bit about how that position where there's excessive knee valgus, how that can compromise your structural integrity when landing. And then let's start with the landing portion, and then we'll talk a little bit about the jumping portion, which I'd just like to pick your brain about.
Of course. So we were talking about landing valgus, and that just means landing kind of knock-kneed for kind of layman people who are listening to this that may not have medical background or like training in that. That's where someone comes down and their knees come together and they land kind of knock-kneed position, feet kind of splayed out. And that can be detrimental to your knee ligaments. So your knee ligamentous structures can really take a lot of stretch during those times. So if you come down, I'm going to just use volleyball because that's what I know really well. We're coming down from a hit, and you're coming down from an attack, and we want to land on 2 feet. That's the first important part of volleyball landing mechanics. Did you want to land on 2 feet versus 1? It allows you to disperse force as you're landing and absorb the ground a little bit more through 2 feet versus 1. Most injuries to the ACL come from a landing on 1 foot in volleyball. That's what I've seen in research so far, is that's where injury occurs. And that's because now, if you're landing and your knees are coming in together, if you think about where every force you put down, there's equal and opposite force that comes back up to you. So as you land, you have all of your mass coming down. That's a force coming to the ground. And when you hit the ground, force comes back up. And with the knees coming in towards each other, it just changes where force is distributed back up through your body. It also eats some of your power to be able to rebound back up off, right? So it takes away some of that power and ability to use that force again to explode up. So if your knees are coming in together and you're landing, you're no longer transferring force through major bones and muscles that surround your joints, where that's where we're the weakest at anyway. Anywhere in your body where there's a transition, right, from one bone to the next or one shape of bone to the next, that becomes kind of a weak chain in the link. It can't, that's where injuries tend to happen, right? So if we're coming through and the ankle no longer is absorbing good force, you've kind of you come in, you don't put the Achilles tendon in its full ability to rebound. You don't have your feet in a full position for your plantar fascia to absorb all the ground reaction force. What happens is you just translate all that force into your ligamentous tissue in your knee, and it's not designed to take all of that force. So landing with a ton of valgus or knee knock position can really cause havoc on your knees in particular, because they're kind of in the middle of the leg. They're just meant to transfer force up and down. They don't really create a lot. They're at the mercy of how your hip and ankle are focused and working. And if you're in knee valgus, you already have your hips kind of pulled in. You're taking the glutes out, which are big powerhouses, to come through and absorb this force and send it back up into the world. So landing like that, it just puts your ligaments at a little bit of a disadvantage. There is such a thing as dynamic valgus, right? So you come in and out of this knock knee position a little bit through any athletic position you're in. It's really, I don't want people to get caught up in the fact that, oh my God, I have to have my knee in this position, or I have to have, my knees can't go over my toes. No, they can and they should, right? Through movements, because that's how we're designed to move. And there's not really a black and white. It's all shades of gray in body movement, because everyone's so different. Your hips are structured a little differently than mine. If someone already has a little bit of extra anteversion or internal rotation of their femurs, or their thigh bones are kind of rolled in, right, they're going to land in more valgus because their hip structure is set in that way. And if I kind of continually try to rotate them out, now I put them at chance for dislocation as they absorb force, because their body's different. So I can't say everybody shouldn't land in valgus, but there's some degree that you're like, whoa, if you can not do that, then don't, right? Like, you don't want to put that extra stress on your ligamentous tissue. And I say dynamic valgus because you should move in and out of degrees of it as you jump and land. But it shouldn't be automatic. All this force is coming through there. It's very small degrees in or out.
Yeah, I've seen skateboarders go off these huge jumps, either off of steps or off of ramps, and their knees are like just caved way in, and like looking at it when they land, I'm just like, oh, like they had to just blow their knee out, and then they pop right up and they're fine. And so I think a lot of that is not only like genetically driven, but then also there has to be some sort of training aspect or conditioning aspect where they didn't start out doing that, but as they jumped more and more steps or further on the ramp or higher on the ramp, like there's a training adaptation there where the ligaments can take on more load, the muscles around the knee can take on a little bit more give, let's say. But I think that's probably more of an exception to the rule. And I don't think it's a good idea just to for people to say, oh, look, that person can do it, so we should all do that. I think, like you said, there's a range of normal movement, especially at the knee. It's, we call it a hinge joint, but it does more than just flex and extend in that sagittal plane. Like, there is some lateral give, and that's important. So most of what I do is deal with at least with adult athletes, is with runners and triathletes, and predominantly marathon, half marathon, and then full Ironman, half Ironman. And if your knees are caving in big time every step, usually it's combined with excessive pronation and completely collapsing arch, and they're not able to absorb force. They can't apply force, and I'm not sure what the ground reaction forces are with jumping and landing on both feet, but in running, uh, we're looking at 4 times your body weight in ground reaction force. With like jogging, that can go all the way up to 10, 12 times your body weight in ground reaction force every time you take a step. If you're sprinting, that's way up there. But I mean, if 4 times your body weight, if you weigh, let's say you weigh 100 pounds and you're running a marathon, that's 400 pounds of force that the ground is pushing right back at you. And if you've got that, even a slight knee valgus, that shear stress around the knee, instead of, like you said, the body being able to absorb, dissipate, and recycle and reuse that force, you're not only increasing your risk of injury, you're leaving performance on the table. You're slower than you could be. I mean, yeah, you could be way faster. So that's just one
Yeah,
of
for
those things.
sure. Yeah, for sure, for sure. And I like that you said that about running. Runners, you're in single stance every stride. You're always on, if you're running at a good clip, you're never on 2 feet. You're always on one at a time, which is fantastic when you think about it. But and how people, I'm always impressed. Like before I started working with my own company, I had this reputation all of a sudden that I was working with ultra marathon runners here. You help one and then they spread the word because the community's so small. Next thing I know, I was like, getting all these calls to the clinic and they're like, do you work with ultra marathoners? I'm like, I guess so. Yeah. It depends on what you have going on. Like if it's something I can treat, sure. If it's something I know, yeah. If not, I'm going to give you a referral to someone else that I know in the area. But yeah, it was so weird. But I had one guy who came in and he kept having ankle pains and chronic calf tightness when he would get to like a mile 25, right? His stride was hideous. His knee would just come, one leg, his knee would almost touch the other just as soon as he got into like his stride, right? Like once he started going, I was just like, whoa, what is going on with that? But it was his hip. His hip was just fatiguing so fast on that side. He had like his muscles were just toast. By about 25 minutes into a run, you could start seeing it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, and now you're running 50 miles on that bad boy? No wonder why you're coming to me. Your ankle's all flared up, your toes, your big toes just dead. It's got a huge bunion next to it. It's all tore up. The nail's just gone on one side of your toe, and your knee's blown up. It's gapping. Like when I test the ligamentous structure, it's just
Ooh.
loose as all get out because you've been running and running and training on it. And then your hip, you couldn't even do a side plank, Kevin. Like,
Oh yeah.
it blew my mind. I was just kind of like, you are one of the fittest people I've ever seen in my life, and you can't do a side plank for 10 seconds on that side because your hip just done. Like, whoa, it was kind of crazy. But the whole thought was that he didn't control the knees at the mercy, right? So like that's an easy thing to go after. I look at ankle mobility and control within that mobility, and then hip strength, right? Like, what's your hip external rotation strength? What's your hip extension strength? Do you know how to use your hip extensors? Right? Like that's a big problem I see too. People use their low back a lot to open their stride or to get that push off. They extend from their back and they just lose so much force, so much power that they could be generating, that just by cleaning that motion up, you tend to see performance enhanced by a lot. Which is
Yeah.
kind of cool.
Yeah. Most runners, especially endurance runners, have they're so quad dominant. They're so hip flexor dominant. Their ability to extend their hips is usually pretty poor. Like they're unfortunately, and this is changing, but unfortunately, it's still the case that so many runners think, I don't need to strength train my lower body because I run, and that takes care of strength training for my legs. And it's like, yeah, but you're running. I'm sounding like a broken record here. Sagittal plane only. You're not training laterally at all. You're not training rotationally at all. And so the way that I tend to explain it to my athletes, to my runners, is the muscles that stabilize you when you're going straight are the muscles that mobilize you when you go laterally in general. So we need to train the heck out of these lateral movers because they're going to keep you more straight when you go into your run. So, being able to resist rotation while you run is going to limit your energy leaks, and that's going to increase, your running efficiency and performance. And then being able to move laterally will make it so that your glute med has better, and your glute max fibers as well have way better control of your knee, so that those adductors aren't just ripping your knee in every time you take a step, because they're getting recruited as soon as your hip flexors fatigue. And they're going to fatigue really quick because you're locked into an anterior pelvic tilt all the time, because when you're not running, you're sitting. And so it's just,
Yeah, I think that's too. And I'm going to use that to jump right into the second part of your question about jumping, and how you can control it, because cue volleyball, we're always in kind of a squat position on our toes. Very female sports, females already are more quad dominant most of the time than males, right? So, but even males in volleyball, you go from this really crouched position to a full triple extension, right? Like you get all the way up, which is crazy when you think about it, because it's so short. And now I'm expecting you to elongate quickly and be able to control for an attack or a spike or a serve. You're you're stretching everything on the front side out as best you can, and then contracting it. Well, now think about if you're loading in practice and you're doing all these down drills where you're hunched over in a squat athletic position to pass. Everything on the back is kind of getting stretched out, right? Like it's in a stretch position. And then if we go directly into a jump, which is how you do in volleyball if you're playing in the front row, you're going directly into a jump and you're expecting your body to respond very quickly. But if you've never trained the backside to be concentric and the front side to be stretched out or eccentric, loading, right, the pulling through, how do you control that? Because they're not used to. And what happens, God forbid you hit someone on the other side of the net, right? Someone comes up and gives you a block and they tap you or push the ball into you, and now you have to control this kind of sideways movements, but you've never trained it. Yeah, I like that. That's a really good point. It applies to many sports across the way, but you lose a lot of energy. I think you've already said it. You lose so much energy to have the knee go inward that your vertical leap is no longer as efficient and as good as it could be. So I think that's the biggest thing, is you lose the ability to recycle that force that you're getting from the ground. And I think that's like the only thing I remember about physics, like equal and opposite force, right? Like, I had to take so many physics courses, and my husband is a mechanical engineer, and he's very much a math guy. And so I'm like, sometimes we get into these talks and he's like, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm like, yeah, I took physics once. And he was like, okay, but like, you only know one portion of physics because that's what really applies to you. Like, I'm talking about a whole realm of things. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. But I know equal and opposite forces. So that's the big part in athletics.
That's everything comes down to that. Like you're not moving. Yeah, you're not moving until you apply force into the ground. So
yeah, and I think for jumping, a lot of people they do like, I hate to see the knees kiss on takeoff. Like, I don't want to see those knees cave in on takeoff. And if I see that, it's usually the hip. The hip is underperforming. The adductors are taking over. The glutes are going off. Like they're just silent. They're really not getting recruited appropriately. And sometimes it's the ankle, right? How they set the motion. And that they work together. Your feet cue what your hips are going to do. Your hips cue where your feet are going to land, and how they're going to respond and take force. So they really work together. We're one body, and it all connects. And so I like to say to people, I really like to look at people's shoes, because especially in volleyball, like you shouldn't be in a running shoe to be on the court, because the demand of the sport is totally different. Running shoes, they kind of set you back a little bit, and we're up on our tiptoes the whole time, and we want to land, and you got to have ability to absorb some of that through the shoe. So I think that's the first place I start for a lot of people. Is I always look at their shoes. I take their shoes and just look at the bottom of them when they come into me for rehab. If they're coming to me for any kind of lower extremity injury or like low back, I just say, can you take your shoes off for me? Are these the shoes you wear daily? And then, are these the shoes you wear for sport? Let me see those. And I can just tell a lot about what's working and what's not based on your shoe wear pattern, which is crazy to think about. But once you really are in tune with how the body typically moves, you know what's expected of the sport, the demand that you're looking at. you can see the shoe and just see, wow, it's really worn out here, or wow, this. And then I have people take their socks off because I want to see what their feet look like. Where do they have bunions? Where do they have calluses on their feet? Where's their foot look pristine, like it's a baby's foot that's never walked before, right? That tells me where they put force as they go. And if you're doing something all the time, then you're going to have those wear patterns on your feet and in your shoes that it's just really easy to see. So I always look at that too for my athletes and people that I'm seeing for clientele. Just let me see your shoe. Let me see let me see what your foot looks like, because I think it's an underappreciated thing how we translate force to the ground and then absorb it back up. It's your foundation. And if you have a weak foundation, anything you put on top of it just doesn't really matter. It's not going to last.
Yeah, no, that's so true. That's it's the same with running. Like looking at somebody's shoes, like that, the amount of information that you can pull from that, you can tell whether they're striking their heels and landing way out in front of them and initiating a braking force every step, or whether they're wearing out the inside edge and just excessively pronating and they're not getting any supination at all, or whether like I had a kid this past cross country season who had a diagonal wear line from the outside. It was like the outside of his heel to basically to his big toe. So it was super, super unique. I had not seen that before. And it was just like that line was gone and there was tread everywhere else. But I'm like, okay. And then I watched him run and he would land way out in front of him on the outside of his heel. And then by the time he pushed off, he had rolled that arch in completely and was just pushing off his big toe. So it's like that.
He had no posterior tibialis control at all. That thing was probably so elongated and inflamed and irritated the more mileage that person did. That's my favorite pattern to see on a shoe. I just laugh because it's like, how does that even feel comfortable for you? Like you just went ahead and did that? Because I'm like, you need a quarter of a shoe. Just cut this shoe right down the middle, replace the middle, and you'll be good every time, because your whole the other four toes, there's nothing going on there. Like, yeah, but that's yeah, that poor big toe is taking a beating. Whew. They're losing their windlass mechanism. They're losing all the power that they could generate through that foot to have a stiff foot and push it to really propel. I bet you if you clean that up, that person became a lot faster.
Yeah, after I only worked with him about 3 or 4 weeks before the season ended, but even within that amount of time, we were able to change a lot. Just because, I mean, he's a young kid, so I can't over cue him. So basically, all I told him was to focus on landing with his foot underneath his hip instead of out in front of him, and that shifted from a heel strike to more of a midfoot strike. And then I just had to train the heck out of getting him off his heels, where he was doing like weighted walking, where he couldn't let his heels touch the ground, and that then shifted him into inversion with his feet, where his heels were way out. So then we had to make some adjustments there, and but overall, like way better even after a few weeks, just because once he understood what was going on. And this is another helpful cue that I find, is to like video the athlete and then show them what they look like. It's not often enough to just say, hey, this is what you're doing, because in their mind they're like, no, I'm not doing that. You're telling me what to do and I'm executing that cue. It's like, you think you are. Your brain might be telling you that. You're not. So yeah.
I think that's my favorite debate to have with people is they're like, no, I'm doing that. I'm like, no, you're not. No, I'm doing that. I'm like, okay, cool, you're not. But let's show me for a second. Like,
yes.
Let me show you what you're doing. This is what I see. But I always wait. I video people and I say, well, tell me, what do you see? And sometimes people will be like, that looks perfect. And I'm like, you see that looks really good? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, other people are like, oh my God, I see what is my hip doing or whatever. It's kind of funny to see that. And I know that's a big component of higher end athletics is they'll video the practices or the games or whatever and break down movements. That doesn't always happen. I mean, that really doesn't happen a lot in early sports, right? So we're talking grade school, middle school. You're not having the huddle out there and looking at it. And that's an app, right? For video recording huddle is most people will use that. But like you're not looking at that. Like they're just playing and they shouldn't be really looking at that. Like kids are growing so fast that it's kind of a moot point to tell them to move their body 10 degrees in this direction or whatever. Like I kind of tell them in general, whenever you're doing certain things, that you should have pressure on your foot in these points. So try to feel it there. Or you should be able to move your hip this, you should feel this happening whenever you do that motion. And that way they can adjust as they grow and hit growth spurts, because that's another thing that's not accounted for in youth athletics. These kids are prepubescent and they're growing and their bones are growing. And every time their bones grow, their brain now has to learn this movement pattern again, because now their lever arm is so much longer and their muscles have to adapt to that longer lever arm. So that's another thing that I see typically is growth plate injuries because of the training. And the athletes don't know, like they don't, that's something else I really challenge all coaches that work with any kind of youth athletics to track growth. I think that's so important to have your athletes track their growth. And if they've grown a lot, you need to step back and work on the basics, the fundamental movement patterns without loading, without speed, without power acceptance. You're working on just controlling the new movement pattern because it's new to them. And and that doesn't take long. Most of the time, kids' brains are so absorbent, like they just boom, 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 right? They can catch on to things. But taking it back and really tracking growth is huge. And that's one thing I tell everybody, that I'm on a soapbox for that. Check growth in your athletes, your young athletes, prepubescent athletes. Check their growth because they grow so fast. I mean, my niece, she's 14 and she's 5'9" now. But I remember when she was in like 4th grade, she hit a 5-inch growth spurt in like 2 months. Like just boom, right? Like, holy cow. Now her legs are, she was a little soccer player. Poor thing. This is my favorite. Poor thing. Like she's a little soccer player. And all her little friends are shorter than her. And they're still able to kick the ball pretty far down the field. And now all of a sudden she can't kick the ball. Like she literally can't run and she can't kick the ball because she grew 5 inches in like 8 weeks. Like her femurs were so long and she had no muscle mass there anymore because it's all so stretched out. And her little joints were taking a beating because now she's trying to play this select level soccer team and she can't kick the ball. Well, her coach tried to come up with a really clever idea to keep her in the sport, and he put her in the goal. And let me tell you, she is not a keeper. The first ball that got kicked at her, she straight up ducked. She was like, no, thank you. Well, I was like, hey, you know what? Keeper's not for everybody, but for her, I mean, she had a good wingspan, but she had no idea how to control it. And she couldn't control that force. And I think that's something that coaches may overlook, because now you have in volleyball, you have 12, 15 athletes on your team. At that time, many of them, if they're in 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th grade, 8th grade, boys or girls, they're growing all the time. Like they're just growing. You have to actually focus more on helping them control their body before you load power, before you put speed, but before you put strength in there. Like you just need to help them control their body. And I think that's a message that I want everyone to know, is track growth and help people that have grown control their bodies, because that's where injuries happen. Like that's where injuries happen in youth sports, is they're not learning how to control their longer limbs to be able to decelerate them, to be able to create power through them. They just add speed. Speed's the quickest thing, right? Like it's easy to get. It's the first thing that people default to. If they're off balance, they add speed to it because I can't fall if I go faster. Like my brain doesn't have to think as hard if I go faster. So they just try to add speed, and then you can't slow yourself down. And when that happens, that's injuries. So I think that is a challenge I put out there for everyone that works with youth athletics, is take time to think about it and track growth. And I'm talking like, if they grow a couple inches, if they grow an inch, you're not going to notice. Like if you're seeing that person a couple times, the kid's not going to notice, you're not going to notice. Like, but on Mondays when they come into the gym, just have them measure themselves, 2 minutes. It takes 2 minutes to have the whole team measure it and write it in their own little tracker. And if this athlete, they're all young athletes, even 3rd graders can do this. If they see that they've changed more than an inch in 2 weeks, come talk to the coach, because practice needs to change for you a little bit. And you may find that you have a whole group of them that have changed all of a sudden and you didn't even notice it, right? Because it's really hard to notice an inch or a half inch. But that's something I put on anybody who works with any kind of youth is watch their growth, because if you're pushing someone and they just grown, whew, you're doing a disservice to that person, that athlete, that young person.
Yeah, I think you're right. And some kids they're gonna feel those growing pains, and some kids may not really feel a whole lot, even though they're experiencing a lot of change. And if you're not managing that variable, then you're leaving yourself open to some serious issues there. So I think that's really good advice. So, let's say that there is a youth volleyball athlete out there who has experienced an injury or who has some questions. Can they go through like your online physical therapy to reach out to you for some help?
For sure. So, with my license, I'm bound to treat patients who are only in the states in which I'm licensed as a physical therapist. So, currently, I'm only licensed in Colorado and Illinois. That's where I have active licenses. So, if an athlete is in one of those states, be it they live there or they're just visiting there, as long as they're physically located in one of those states at the time we're speaking, then I can treat them. However, any athlete that's a volleyball athlete that has questions, I do offer consultations, and I have a plethora of individuals across the country, across the United States. I even have some folks in Canada, Australia, um, but yeah, those are the big ones, and that I can connect you to and see if I have someone who can help you that really understands what you're going through. I mean, I know people all over the country that are great therapists that really understand how to treat athletes and how to kind of get you where you need to be. That offer in person and online. So I'm happy to connect people if they ever have questions. They can just visit my website, which is www.calibratedppt.com. So calibratedpt.com. And I have a live chat on there that comes straight to my cell phone, and I just reply to people. They can book an appointment or whatever, figure it out, book a consultation, which is just a free video chat that I do just to see if I can help you or not. And if I can't, who can I connect you to help you? So I'm more than happy to help anybody who has questions. You can reach out to me on social media if you have a question, and we can kind of figure out how to set something up to talk more about it. On my Instagram is probably the best. It's one that seems to be a little bit easier to get messages through, which is calibrated.pt on Instagram, or my Facebook page is Calibrated Physical Therapy PLLC. So any of those are the two social medias that I'm on, but my website is probably the best, just because it tells you a little bit about me. It has my podcast on there, so you may be able to. I have video bonus features to all my podcasts that kind of break down the exercises or shows people the exercises. I gear that more towards coaches, so I really empower coaches to go on there and look at that to help themselves learn a little bit more and not feel like they have to wear 1,000 hats, right? I think youth coaches feel like they have to wear every hat, and they really shouldn't have to. Like, there's a team there to support you. You just have to find them. And I want to be part of your team, right? So I always tell people I'm trying out, right? You're holding tryouts for me. And what I show you is a good tryout. And so I'm hoping that if I try out for people's teams, they want me on them. And I'm only doing that by providing education, which is knowledge is power. And that's what I have, right? Like I've been through school. I have all this knowledge. I've taken the time to learn more. Let me be a part of your team to help you out, either be it in rehab or in prehab or prevention and recovery. So I like to cover all those things for volleyball, so that people are more than happy to reach out to me at any point in time, whether you're in my state or not. And I can connect you or at least give you some easy tips to get started.
That's awesome. So let's talk a little bit more about your podcast. So it's called the Volleyball Coaches Corner. And
Yes.
Excellent. And tell us a little bit about just how long you've been doing that, and some of the specific topics that you've covered, and kind of the goal that you have for the podcast.
Yeah. So first, why I started my podcast, right? So I only started this podcast because I had a baby in February, and I found myself having a lot of free time in the evenings whenever my child was nursing or waking up, right? You don't sleep a lot as a new parent early on. And you're up, I was up all the time. So I'm like, well, now I'm awake because I've woken up and now I'm up all night. So what can I do? So I just started researching about podcasting and thought, this could be a great way to help spread some of my message. I try to keep my podcast under 30 minutes. That way it's quick to absorb. It's not an overload. I cover one topic. I open up my podcast if any coach anywhere has a question about one of their players that had an injury or how to prevent a certain injury. Like all of a sudden they're like, wow, last season I had like 10 ankle sprains. Like half my team was out. You need to think, what did I do wrong? Perfect. Be my guest. Come on to my podcast. Ask this question, because if you have it, I guarantee you hundreds of other people have that exact same question. Let me get this out there and let me educate you and everyone else who's listening about it. So that's the kind of topics I like to cover, is with coaches. And I find a lot of people aren't quite sure. They're kind of afraid to come onto a podcast, right? Like they're like, ooh, I don't know. But honestly, it's just a conversation. And if it's not a good conversation, I won't post it. Like I ask my guests, like, are you okay with me posting this? Like, is it okay if I use this as my podcast? Because I want to share that education. But if you say no, you say no. Like, great, you said no. I will not go against your will and just start posting everything. I always do it on video. I'm always on video because I want you to see me, and I don't care if you're on video or not because it's up to you. It's your preference. So I like that. But I have other healthcare professionals come on, other strength and conditioning professionals, nutrition, psychologists. I'm going to hopefully get an orthopedic surgeon to come on and talk about a little bit about what it means for them to be done with the surgery and kind of wash their hands of you, so people can understand that a little bit more, because I think that's an underrated thing that people don't understand. So I try to cover quick topics. So far, I've done mostly lower extremity this in season 1, and a little bit about nutrition. And so we've covered, let's see, plantar fasciitis for the coaches, right, for adults. Osgood-Schlatters disease, which is a growth injury at the knee. Jumper's knee or patellar tendonitis, which is at the knee. ACL, PCL, all the ligaments of the knee we've covered. So pretty much everything in the knee I've covered. I've covered lateral ankle sprains, leg length discrepancy, so one leg longer than the other. I think that's a concussion. I had one of my colleagues and good friends come on and talk about concussion and kind of what it means for as far as guidelines of how long to wait in between getting advancing through the stages to return fully, and kind of breaking that down, which is cool. And I've had a registered dietitian and nutritionist who's also an Olympic lifter come on and kind of talk about tournament days and eating and not putting so much of a phobia around food. Like, food's not your enemy. Like, all foods are good in some way, shape, or form. It just depends on how you eat them and when, and you shouldn't shame kids about it and create body dysmorphia in boys and girls, which is another topic I can go on for forever, because I cannot stand that, is when people do that to young kids. Eating disorders are already out of control. And I think my whole goal with the first one is just education. I've been recording that. I think I'm on week 14. So I started 14 weeks ago, and I'm going to say I started 15 weeks ago. So I gave myself like a bunch of time just to think about it and kind of write out ideas and topics. And then I gave myself 1 week to try to get people on my podcast. And sometimes I have guests, sometimes I go solo, whatever. It just kind of depends on the vibe. And it's been kind of fun. I've really enjoyed it. I thought, wow, this is kind of a fun thing. I can talk about volleyball and I can talk about rehab all day long. Like, you will literally have to cut me off. I can just keep talking. It's fun. It's fun for me. Like, I get so excited about it because I'm passionate about those two things. And I've married both those passions together, which, if you find that's a fire. Like, if you find people that do that's their fire, right? Like you've found a passion that you do and you're like, this is what I do and I'm good at. And if you love what you do, you're going to give more to people, I find. So if you dread, seeing that person, or dread treating that kind of person or that kind of injury, or working in that kind of realm, like, you're going to give a very subpar service. And that's not cool. So, like, marry your passions and really give good service. So that's season 1. Season 1, I don't know when this episode's going to come out, but on next Sunday, which is November 22nd, I think is next Sunday, I think so.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And November 22nd, I have a very serious topic coming out that I'm hoping, even with you, and I'm going to promote it here. I hope that's okay. Go for it. It's about teen suicide, preventing teen suicide, which is huge. So I talked to a doctor of psychology, and she comes on to the podcast, and she gave 31 minutes of probably the best information that I can get out there to people about teen suicide.
Wow.
It's so impactful, I think, in most people. So anybody that has a kid or works with kids, works with teenagers, like, you should listen to this podcast. You should listen to that episode. If you don't listen to anything else I do, great. I don't, it's fine. I'm not everyone's cup of tea, and I get that. But everyone should listen to that episode that works with teenagers, because in 30 minutes, she gave just loads, I can't even tell you, just loads of great information about how to recognize the risk factors, like what are some pre-existing risk factors, what are the warning signs that someone's contemplating suicide, what resources are out there to help you understand what to do in that situation if you do come across someone who you think is contemplating suicide, what healthcare professional, how to navigate the system to get contact with the right person, get the right help for that person. And then the tragic side is how to grieve, how to help these other young people grieve around the loss. And finance. So she gave all that information in 30 minutes. I mean, it's to the point, it's there, and it's very impactful. So that's a big one that I wanted to get out there in season 1, is like, not only physical stuff, but emotional stuff matters too. And I did it on my ACL podcast episode. I have a friend that she's had multiple ACL repairs, and it actually had caused her to have to pivot out of soccer. She was a really big soccer athlete. Her second repair left her so loose in the knee that she no longer had ligamentous stability. The surgeon that actually did the surgery, when he went to go recheck her, he said, "So when's your surgery scheduled?" Okay, that's nothing you ever want to hear post-surgical. Several months, she's 3 months, 4 months post-surgical, and the doctor comes in and checks the stability of the knee and says, "Okay, when's your surgery scheduled?"
Whoops-a-daisies.
We talk about a mental impact. So not only did she talk about we talked about, how to prevent some ACL injuries, things that you could do. She also talked about the mental impact of what happens when someone does tear their ACL, and how you, as a coach, a teammate, a parent, a friend, can help support that person through their journey, because it's a long journey and it's hard. And so there's a lot of little things like that go into each episode too, that really talk about the mental aspect of helping an athlete overcome their fear and their worries and have support on multiple levels, that we cover in season 1. Season 2, I've already recorded. It's going to release in December of 2020. That's all. It's a fun little topic. It's all coaches who are also parents, and so they coach their own kids in that dynamic, that coach-parent dynamic, which is super cool. So that's my season 2. So I'm taking it away from injuries and kind of taking it into a different aspect of the sport. Season 3, I've already started recording episodes for that too, just because once you start talking to people really want to come on and tell their stories, right? So it's kind of cool. But we're going back to talking with other professionals and coaches about injuries and nutrition and kind of that stuff again. And then season 4, I'm doing a how-to series. So like quick little 5-minute tidbits. So I've already have several years worth planned. So there's a whole lot of stuff that people can gain. But I thought about it for months, Kevin, like there's not, if my brain was clicking, it was clicking. And so I had to write it all down when I had time. But I think that'll be pretty fun. I think some of the injury stuff, it's just basic touching on it and helping you kind of navigate that reintegration phase. Like, what do I do to get these kids coming back from ankle sprains? How can I make sure I'm not pushing them too hard? I want to make sure that comes across. But also there's a different aspect to it, some funniness, some lightheartedness, and some mental training aspect to it that I think gets overlooked, that I try to bring in. Every season's a little bit different. So there's always something new. If injury stuff is not where you want to be, then great, go listen to the how-to series, or go listen to some of these other episodes to hopefully have you in there. And then I do the bonus features, of course, just because if I'm talking about an exercise, it's really hard. I don't do video, it's just all audio. So it's really hard for people to understand that. So I just say, you know what, if you want to see this exercise or what I'm talking about, go check out the video features, which are hosted on my website. And it's just quick. I try to keep them 5 to 7 minutes at most, and we just break through it. And then for coaches, I have a Facebook group. So I have a private Facebook group that I invite volleyball coaches, any volleyball coach that's a youth coach. If you're in college, a lot of the information is not going to be applicable to you. But if you're high school, middle school, grade school, and you're a coach, I have a coaches group that I invite all coaches into that are in that range volleyball. Because I do a Move Your Feet Monday, where we do like some kind of movement drill every Monday. I come on and do a live every Friday, either research article review or some kind of training that somebody has asked for or understand. And then I post a ton of of free content in there for people. And that's called Volleyball Coaches Corner Injury Prevention and Return to Sport on Facebook, if you search that group. And that's really where most people can reach me and figure out what's going on and listen to episodes or watch videos that I have to just, I call it to calibrate their training, right? This is play on my.
I like that.
We're going to calibrate your training a little bit more and elevate you. So you're going to be a calibrated coach at that point in time, because now you're really thinking on multiple levels. And I'm all about play on words and like jokes and word puns. That's kind of my thing.
Nice. I like it. So you might appreciate this then. My last name is Kuhn, Kuhn. My first business I called Kinesiology, and
I love it.
Yeah, but nobody could spell it, nobody could pronounce it, and I was like, all right, Athlete Factors it is. So,
yeah, right. Like you try to be like, okay, it's not a very Googleable business name, which means you're not being found, and then you can't shine in what you do best. So yeah, that's
exactly.
I came up with the Calibrated Physical Therapy, and then it's all about volleyball. So then people are like, that doesn't relate to volleyball. I'm like, it can, because calibrated can relate to a lot of things, because it just means you really thought it out and you really honed it in, right? So, but yeah, I've run into that too, and I'm like, maybe I should have just called it volleyball therapy.
That's right on the nose, isn't it? That's
but people get it. It doesn't leave room for anything else to come in.
Yeah, they'll know exactly what you're all about. That's for sure. So awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. This has been a really fun conversation. I've really enjoyed it and learned a lot. And best of luck on the podcast. But it sounds like you're just blowing up already. So how long are each of these seasons, by the way?
Right now, season 1 is going to be 17 episodes. And season 2, I think is going to be the same. So I'm shooting for about 17 to 20 episodes in a season. So I'm going old school TV style, right? They do 21 episodes in a season, and instead of this like 6-pack. But I'm trying to go 17 to 20 episodes for a season. I drop a new episode every Sunday. I think for the coach-parent dynamic, I'm going to do 2 at once. I might drop 2 episodes at once on a Sunday. I don't know. I haven't decided yet if I want to do that, because I know I've recorded 21 of them. And I'm like, okay, that's a really long time to just be talking every week. Of 21 weeks of that is a long time. So I think I'm going to cut it back and do 2 episodes at once, and just have like multiple kind of viewpoints going on that you can listen to back to back or whenever. But yeah, I think that's really cool. So I want to say thank you so much, Kevin, for allowing me to come on to your podcast and spread my mission and spread my goal. Like, I really, really appreciate you helping me out by talking to you, and now everyone listening to your audience helps me towards my 100,000 preventable injuries, right? Like, you just help me elevate by, I don't know what your audience is, but by that many people. So if 2 people listen to this, that's even better. So I have you and 2 others. Like,
that's right.
That's perfect. So thank you so much for having me on. I've really enjoyed it.
For sure. Yeah, I wish that I had done the whole season thing. I've just been doing 1 episode every week basically since I started. So you are episode number 79. So I don't know if that number means anything to you, but congratulations regardless.
Heck yeah. My lucky number now, right?
Yes. Awesome. Well, yes. Thanks again, everybody. Oh, what's your Instagram one more time?
It's calibrated.pt.
Awesome. So I'll throw that into the show notes so that everybody can follow you and reach out to you if they need to. But yeah, hopefully we'll get you on again down the road to talk more shop, talk more about how this 100,000 goal is rolling, and yeah, that goal really resonates with me. Like, I'm all about preventing these injuries that, they shouldn't happen. They shouldn't be happening. So, and when we correct mechanics and educate the coaches, educate the athletes, educate the parents, good things happen. So, alrighty, y'all. Thanks for watching and listening, and stay tuned for next week's episode.